My husband left me for his secretary, thinking he'd found his perfect escape from our marriage, and landed himself a younger, more exciting woman. He had no idea I was her boss and owned the building where both of them lived. Wait until you hear how his romantic fantasy turned into the biggest mistake of his life, and how I ended up controlling every aspect of his so-called new beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember every detail of that humid Thursday evening in August when my perfectly orchestrated world came crashing down around me. The ceiling fans in our Charleston penthouse were spinning lazily overhead, casting dancing shadows across the exposed brick walls of what had once been our dream home. I'd just finished reviewing the quarterly reports for Magnolia Property Management, the real estate empire I'd built from a single duplex inheritance into a 200-unit portfolio spanning 3 counties in South Carolina. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if Tales of Justice Served Ice Cold resonate with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I've got something even more shocking lined up for you. My name is Vivian Beaumont, and until that devastating Thursday, I thought I understood exactly who I was and where my life was heading. At 41, I was a self-made real estate mogul who'd transformed my late grandmother's modest Charleston duplex into a thriving property management business. I owned apartment complexes, commercial buildings, and some of the most sought-after rental properties in the historic district. But more than that, I was married to Marcus Beaumont, my college sweetheart and business school study partner, who I'd supported through his finance career for 16 years. Marcus worked as a senior financial advisor at Palmetto Wealth Management, one of Charleston's most prestigious investment firms. It was steady work, respectable income, but nothing compared to the empire I'd built through strategic property acquisitions and relentless networking. Still, I was proud of our partnership. We were the couple everyone pointed to as relationship goals, successful professionals who'd grown together, supported each other's dreams, and built a beautiful life in the heart of the South. Our penthouse overlooked the harbor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the historic church spires, and antebellum mansions that made Charleston one of America's most romantic cities. We hosted dinner parties for the city's business elite, attended charity galas where I was frequently honored for my community development projects, and spent weekends antiquing on King Street or sailing our yacht around the barrier islands. Marcus seemed content playing the supportive husband role. While I closed deals and expanded my portfolio, he managed our personal investments and provided the kind of stable, steady presence that complemented my high-energy entrepreneurial spirit. He'd joke at parties that he was married to Charleston's landlord queen, and I'd laugh, thinking he was proud of what I'd accomplished. What I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, Marcus had begun to resent living in my shadow. While I was building wealth and gaining recognition, he was watching other men his age become partners at their firms, buy their own buildings, make their own marks on the world. I was so focused on growing my business that I missed the signs of his growing frustration with being known primarily as Vivian Beaumont's husband. That Thursday started like any other. Marcus had left early for what he said was a client breakfast meeting, kissing my cheek as I reviewed lease agreements over my morning coffee. We'd planned to meet for lunch at our favorite restaurant on Rainbow Row, one of those couple traditions that made me feel secure in our relationship despite how busy we'd both become. But Marcus never showed up for lunch. I waited for 20 minutes, at Café Beauregard, checking my phone repeatedly for messages that never came. When I finally called his office, his colleague Ryan told me Marcus had left around noon, saying he had personal business to handle. That was unusual. Marcus was obsessively punctual and never missed appointments without calling. The first real crack in my perfect world appeared when I decided to drive by Palmetto Wealth Management to see if his car was still in the parking garage. It wasn't. But what I found instead sent my blood pressure skyrocketing and made me question everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Marcus's BMW was parked outside Willowbrook Gardens, one of my own apartment complexes on the east side of Charleston. A mid-range property I'd purchased 2 years earlier, popular with young professionals and graduate students because of its reasonable rent and proximity to the College of Charleston. I managed this property personally, knew every tenant, every lease agreement, every maintenance request. What was my husband doing at one of my own buildings in the middle of a workday? I parked across the street and watched, my hands gripping the steering wheel as a sick feeling settled in my stomach. After 15 minutes, Marcus emerged from Building C, Unit 14. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her hand casually intertwined with his, was a young woman with flowing auburn hair and a sundress that showed off her perfect figure. I recognized her immediately, though seeing her in this context made my head spin with confusion and disbelief. Sophia Chen, 26 years old, the new secretary at Palmetto Wealth Management who'd started working there 8 months ago. The bright, ambitious graduate student who'd impressed everyone with her organizational skills and professional demeanor. The same young woman who'd been helping Marcus with his client files and who I'd met briefly at the firm's holiday party last December. The same woman who, according to my property management records, was the primary leaseholder for Unit 14 at Willowbrook Gardens. I sat in my car, watching my husband of 16 years laugh and flirt with his secretary outside an apartment, building that I owned, feeling like I was living in some twisted alternate reality. This wasn't just an affair. This was Marcus conducting his secret relationship on my property, with my tenant, using buildings that I'd worked my entire adult life to acquire. The irony was so sharp it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. While I'd been building wealth and creating security for our future, Marcus had been building a completely different life with a woman who was literally paying me rent every month. As I watched them walk to his car together, Marcus's hand resting possessively on Sophia's lower back, I realized that my husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning his exit strategy using my own properties as his love nest, thinking I'd never discover his perfect little secret. But Marcus had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd forgotten exactly who he was dealing with. I wasn't just his wife. I was Vivian Beaumont, the woman who'd turned a single duplex into a real estate empire by paying attention to every detail, tracking every tenant, and never missing anything that happened on my properties. And now, I was about to remind him exactly what that meant. The devastation I felt watching my husband with another woman was about to transform into something much more powerful. The cold, calculating fury of a business owner who'd just discovered that her biggest betrayer was completely at her mercy. Marcus thought he'd found his perfect escape. He had no idea he'd just walked into a trap of his own making. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hadn't always been Vivian Beaumont, Charleston real estate queen with a portfolio worth $12 million. 20 years ago, I was Vivienne LeBlanc, a scrappy Cajun girl from the Louisiana Bayou, whose biggest dream was escaping the cycle of poverty that had trapped my family for generations. My story began in a shotgun house outside New Orleans where my grandmother Mima Celeste raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. Mima was a force of nature, barely 5 feet tall but tougher than Louisiana cypress wood. She worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in the Garden District, cleaning their mansions while teaching me that dignity came from hard work, not handouts. "Vivian, Cher," she'd say in her thick Cajun accent, "rich folks don't get that way by accident. You watch how they think, how they move their money, how they make every dollar work twice." She was right. While other kids my age were playing video games, I was studying how the families Mima worked for managed their investments, how they talked about real estate, how they built generational wealth. By the time I was 16, I could recite property, tax assessments, and rental yield calculations like other teenagers knew song lyrics. The scholarship to the College of Charleston changed everything. Business school was where I met Marcus Beaumont, the golden boy from one of Charleston's oldest families. The Beaumonts had old money, not just wealthy, but the kind of generational aristocracy that came with street names and historical society memberships. Marcus was everything I wasn't. Confident, connected, comfortable in social situations that made me feel like an outsider. But he was drawn to my ambition, my hunger for success that his privileged upbringing had never required him to develop. I was fascinated by his easy charm, his natural ability to network, and the way doors opened for him simply because of his last name. We complemented each other perfectly, his social capital combined with my business acumen. When Mima passed away during my senior year, she left me her only asset, a modest duplex in Charleston's east side that she'd somehow managed to purchase decades earlier with her housekeeping savings. It wasn't much, 2 small units, outdated plumbing, and a leaky roof, but it was mine. While my classmates were planning post-graduation trips to Europe, I was researching property renovation loans and studying Charleston's rental market trends. Marcus found my entrepreneurial obsession charming at first. He'd joke that he was dating the only college student who read real estate listings for fun. After graduation, while he started his training program at Palmetto Wealth Management, I threw myself into transforming that duplex. I learned to do basic electrical work from YouTube videos, negotiated with contractors in broken Spanish I'd picked up from construction crews, and spent every weekend painting, cleaning, and upgrading fixtures. The duplex was profitable within 6 months. The rental income covered the mortgage payments and generated enough cash flow for me to start saving for my next acquisition. Marcus was impressed, but didn't really understand the long-term vision. To him, it was a cute side project, something to keep me busy while he built his real career in finance. Our wedding was a perfect Charleston affair. Historic venue, Spanish moss, bourbon cocktails, and guest lists that read like a who's who of low-country society. Marcus's family welcomed me warmly, though I always sensed they saw me as an interesting novelty, the ambitious girl from Louisiana who'd captured their son's heart. I didn't mind. I was too focused on building my business to worry about social acceptance. By our 5th anniversary, I owned 4 properties. By our 10th, I had 12 units generating steady cash flow across 3 Charleston neighborhoods. Marcus's career was advancing steadily, too. He'd made senior advisor and was managing portfolios for some of Charleston's wealthiest families. We were the couple everyone admired. Successful, attractive, financially secure, and seemingly devoted to each other. Our penthouse was a testament to our combined success. The exposed brick walls showcased Marcus's collection of antique maps and my growing collection of business awards. The kitchen island, where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, was made from reclaimed wood salvaged from one of my renovation projects. The wine cellar held bottles from vineyards we'd visited during anniversary trips to Napa Valley and Tuscany. Marcus had seemed genuinely proud of my achievements, at least in the early years. He'd bragged to his colleagues about his wife, the real estate mogul, and bring clients to see my properties when they were looking for investment opportunities. He understood the numbers. My portfolio was generating more passive income than his salary, and my net worth had surpassed his by a significant margin. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic had shifted. Maybe it was when Charleston Business Journal featured me on their cover as Entrepreneur of the Year. Maybe it was when the mayor appointed me to the city's Economic Development Committee. Or maybe it was when his own mother started introducing me as the one with the real business sense at family gatherings. Marcus had begun making subtle comments about my work schedule, my property management calls during dinner, my weekend site, visits to check on renovations. He'd suggest that maybe it was time to slow down or enjoy what we've built instead of constantly acquiring new properties. When I'd get excited about a potential investment opportunity, he'd point out the risks. Rather than celebrate the possibilities, I'd attributed his changed attitude to the natural evolution of a long marriage. We were in our 40s now, established, comfortable. Maybe he was right that I could afford to be less driven, more present in our relationship. I'd started delegating more property management tasks to my assistant manager, Carolina, and making more effort to prioritize date nights and weekend getaways. What I didn't realize was that Marcus hadn't just grown tired of my ambition. He'd grown resentful of my success. While I was building wealth and gaining recognition, he was watching younger advisors at his firm get promoted ahead of him, seeing other men his age buy their own buildings instead of living in their wives' penthouses. He'd started feeling like he was living in my shadow, dependent on my financial success, known primarily as an accessory to my achievements. Even worse, I'd been so focused on maintaining our partnership that I'd missed the signs of his growing attraction to a completely different kind of life. A simpler life where he could be the provider, the decision-maker, the one with the power and control. That's where Sophia Chen entered our story. 8 months ago, Sophia had started working as the executive secretary at Palmetto Wealth Management, fresh out of graduate school with a master's degree in communications, beautiful in that effortless way that made heads turn, and young enough to still believe that love conquered all practical considerations. Marcus had mentioned her occasionally. The brilliant new secretary who was so organized, so eager to learn, so refreshingly uncomplicated compared to the demanding clients and complex financial instruments that dominated his daily work. I'd even met her briefly at the firm's holiday party, where she'd impressed me with her poise and professional demeanor. What I hadn't realized was that Sophia represented everything Marcus had begun to crave: youth, admiration, simplicity, and, most importantly, the chance to be someone's hero instead of someone's supporting character. As I sat in my car outside Willowbrook Gardens, watching my husband of 16 years hold hands with a woman barely older than our imaginary daughter, I began to understand that this wasn't just a midlife crisis or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was Marcus's attempt to rewrite his entire story with himself as the leading man instead of the devoted husband of Charleston's most successful female entrepreneur. What he didn't know was that his leading lady was paying me rent every month, and his romantic hideaway was one of my most profitable investment properties. The man who'd grown tired of living in my shadow was about to discover what it felt like to be completely under my control. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of connecting dots you wish had never formed a picture. Marcus was already gone, another early client meeting, according to the note he'd left on his pillow. But this time, I wasn't buying his casual lies. This time I was going to get answers. I called my property manager, Carolina Rodriguez, and asked her to meet me at my downtown office. Carolina had been with me for 3 years, handling day-to-day tenant relations while I focused on acquisitions and major renovations. She was sharp, observant, and knew more about what happened at my properties than I sometimes realized. "Carolina," I said as soon as she walked into my office, "tell me everything you know about Sophia Chen in Unit 14 at Willowbrook Gardens." Her expression immediately shifted from casual greeting to concerned professionalism. "Is there a problem with her lease, Mrs. Beaumont? She's actually one of our most reliable tenants, always pays on time, never complains, keeps the unit immaculate." "How long has she been living there?" Carolina pulled out her tablet and scrolled through the records. "She signed the lease 8 months ago. First-time renter, excellent credit score, works at Palmetto Wealth Management." Her reference letters were impeccable. 8 months, the same time Marcus had started mentioning the brilliant new secretary at his office. My stomach churned as the timeline became crystal clear. "Has she ever had visitors? Anyone you've noticed coming and going regularly?" Carolina hesitated, and I could see her weighing how much to share. "Mrs. Beaumont, I don't usually monitor tenants' personal lives unless there are noise complaints or lease violations, but..." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. There has been a man visiting fairly regularly. Older, well-dressed, drives a dark blue BMW. The description fit Marcus perfectly. My hands clenched into fists as I realized that my husband had been conducting his affair literally under my nose, in a building I owned, with a tenant whose rent checks I'd been depositing into my business account every month. How regularly? I asked, my voice deadly calm. 2, sometimes 3 times a week. Usually during lunch hours or early evening. I only noticed because he parks in the visitor spot that's visible from the management office window. I felt like I was going to be sick. While I'd been working late nights to expand my portfolio, attending city planning meetings to get zoning approvals, and dealing with contractor schedules, Marcus had been creating his own little love nest in one of my properties. Carolina, I need you to pull every piece of documentation we have on Sophia Chen. Lease application, credit report, employment verification, references, everything. Of course, but Mrs. Beaumont, if you don't mind me asking, what's this about? I looked at Carolina, this woman who'd helped me build my business, who'd seen me work 16-hour days to close deals and manage properties, who'd watched me celebrate every acquisition like it was Christmas morning. She deserved honesty. That man visiting Sophia Chen is my husband, and I found out yesterday that he's been lying to me for months. Carolina's face went pale. Oh my God, Mrs. Beaumont. I had no idea. If I had known. You couldn't have known, I said, though part of me wondered if the signs had been there, all along. Just get me those files. While Carolina retrieved Sophia's paperwork, I sat at my desk staring at the property management software on my computer screen. With a few clicks, I could access detailed records for every property I owned, every tenant, every lease agreement, every maintenance request. This system had been my pride and joy, a comprehensive database that gave me complete oversight of my real estate empire. Now it felt like a weapon I'd accidentally aimed at my own heart. Sophia's file was depressingly thorough. Credit score of 847. Master's degree in communications from the College of Charleston. Employment verification from Palmetto Wealth Management signed by the office manager. 2 glowing reference letters from former professors describing her as responsible, mature, and destined for great things. But it was the emergency contact information that made my blood run cold. Primary emergency contact, Marcus Beaumont. Relationship, employer-supervisor. They'd been planning this for 8 months. While I'd been trusting my husband's explanations about late meetings and client dinners, he'd been setting up his girlfriend in one of my rental properties, positioning himself as her emergency contact, creating an entire alternate life that I was unknowingly financing. I called the leasing office at Willowbrook Gardens and spoke to Janet, the on-site manager who handled showings and move-ins. Janet, I need to ask you about the Chen tenant in Unit 14. Do you remember her application process? Oh yes, Miss Chen. Lovely young woman. Very professional, had all her paperwork in perfect order. Actually, her supervisor came with her to the showing to help her pick out the best unit. My heart stopped. Her supervisor came with her? Yes, a very distinguished gentleman. Mr. Beaumont, I believe his name was. He seemed quite invested in making sure she found the right place. Even helped her understand the lease terms and suggested she take the unit with the garden view instead of the one facing the parking lot. I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. Marcus hadn't just stumbled into an affair with his secretary. He'd actively helped her find an apartment in one of my buildings, guided her through the application process, and positioned himself as her professional reference. He'd been orchestrating this entire situation while I was completely oblivious. The betrayal was so calculated, so deliberately deceptive that it took my breath away. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis. This was a methodical plan to create a separate life while keeping me as his financial safety net. Janet, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. When they were looking at the unit, did they seem professional? Like a normal supervisor helping an employee? There was a pause, and I could practically hear Janet choosing her words carefully. Well, Mrs. Beaumont, I try not to judge, but they seemed quite comfortable with each other, more than I'd expect from a typical work relationship. She was very attentive to his opinions, and he was quite protective of her interests during the lease negotiation. Protective of her interests. Using my property as their romantic hideaway while I was paying the mortgage, handling the maintenance, and managing the investment that was facilitating their affair. I hung up the phone and immediately called my accountant, David Tran, who managed the financial side of my property portfolio. David, I need you to pull all the records for Unit 14 at Willowbrook Gardens. Rent payments, late fees, maintenance costs, everything. Sure thing, Vivian. Any particular reason? Is there an issue with that tenant? You could say that. How much has that unit generated in rental income since the lease started? Let me check. Unit 14, Chen tenant. Looks like $1,800 per month for 8 months, so $1,400 total. Plus the security deposit of $1,800. She's actually been one of our most punctual rent payers. $14,400. My husband's mistress had paid me $14,400 to conduct her affair with my husband in my building. The irony was so twisted it was almost funny, except I felt like crying instead of laughing. David, one more question. Have there been any maintenance requests for that unit? Actually, yes. 3 requests over the past 8 months. New deadbolt, lock installation in month 2, bathroom fixture upgrade in month 4, and a special request for blackout curtains in month 6. All approved and completed. Each maintenance request told a story I didn't want to understand. The new deadbolt, lock for privacy and security. The bathroom fixture upgrade to make the space more romantic. The blackout curtains to ensure their afternoon encounters couldn't be observed from outside. I'd been financing the infrastructure for my husband's affair, paying contractors to make his love nest more comfortable and secure, all while thinking, I was just being a responsive landlord to a reliable tenant. The final piece of evidence came when I decided to check my own business emails. I searched for any correspondence with Sophia Chen and found exactly what I was afraid I'd find. 3 emails from Sophia to my property management company over the past 8 months. Professional, polite messages about lease questions and maintenance requests. But the tone was oddly familiar, almost overly friendly for a tenant I'd supposedly only met once at a holiday party. The last email, sent just 2 weeks ago, made my blood boil. Dear Mrs. Beaumont, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to let you know how much I've enjoyed living at Willowbrook Gardens. The unit has been perfect for my needs, and I've felt so comfortable and secure here. I'm planning to renew my lease for another year when it comes up in a few months. Thank you for providing such a wonderful living environment. I hope we'll have the chance to connect more in the future. Warmly, Sophia Chen. The casual mention of wanting to connect more in the future felt like a slap in the face. This woman was sleeping with my husband in my building and sending me cheerful emails about how much she enjoyed the experience. But it was the phrase, comfortable and secure, that finally pushed me over the edge from hurt into fury. Sophia felt comfortable and secure conducting an affair with a married man because she had no idea that the wronged wife was literally her landlord. She felt safe betraying me because she didn't know I held all the power in this situation. That was about to change. As I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of months of calculated deception, I realized that Marcus and Sophia had made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed I was just the oblivious wife who paid the bills and stayed out of the way while they built their perfect little romance. They'd forgotten that I was Vivian Beaumont, the woman who'd built a $12 million real estate empire. By paying attention to every detail, tracking every transaction, and never missing anything that happened on my properties. And now, they were both about to discover exactly what it meant to cross someone who owned the ground they were standing. On that weekend, I decided to conduct my own surveillance operation. Marcus had announced he was playing golf with his college buddy Trevor on Saturday morning, followed by drinks at the country club. A perfectly normal weekend routine that I'd never questioned before. Now, I wondered how many of these golf days had actually been spent in Unit 14 at Willowbrook Gardens. Instead of my usual Saturday morning yoga class and property inspections, I parked across the street from Willowbrook Gardens at 9 a.m. with a thermos of coffee and my phone fully charged. If Marcus was lying about golf, I was going to document every second of it. At 10:15 a.m., his BMW pulled into the visitor parking space that Carolina had mentioned. My heart hammered as I watched my husband of 16 years get out of his car carrying a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers, the ones he used to bring me when we were dating. Now he was giving them to another woman in an apartment I owned. Sophia met him at the entrance to Building C, wearing a flowing sundress and sandals that made her look impossibly young and carefree. The way she threw her arms around his neck, the way he spun her around like they were starring in a romantic movie, the way they kissed in full view of anyone who might be watching. It was clear this wasn't just physical attraction. They looked like they were genuinely in love. That realization hurt more than I'd expected. I could have handled a meaningless fling, a midlife crisis that would burn out once the novelty wore off. But watching Marcus look at Sophia with the same adoration he'd once reserved for me, seeing him be romantic and attentive in ways he hadn't been with me in years, that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I took photos, dozens of them. Marcus carrying Sophia's groceries up to her apartment. Marcus pushing her on the swing set in the complex's courtyard like she was a child. Marcus grilling on the small patio outside her unit while she sat at the outdoor table grading what looked like work papers. They had created an entire domestic fantasy together, complete with weekend breakfast dates, shared chores, and intimate moments that belonged in a relationship between equals, not a married man and his employee mistress. But what struck me most was how comfortable they seemed. This wasn't sneaking around or hiding in shame. They were acting like a legitimate couple in their own home, as if I didn't exist at all. Around 2 p.m., I watched them walk to Marcus's car holding hands, clearly heading out for some kind of afternoon date. Once they were gone, I made a decision. That would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I was going to use my master key and inspect Unit 14 personally. As the building owner, I had legal right to enter any unit with proper notice for maintenance or safety inspections. But this wasn't about property management. This was about understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. The apartment told a story that made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a place where Marcus visited Sophia occasionally. This was where he'd been living a completely different life. The refrigerator was stocked with his favorite craft beer and the expensive organic ingredients he liked for weekend cooking. The bathroom counter held his cologne, his electric razor, and his prescription medications. The bedroom closet contained 3 of his business suits, casual clothes, and a bathrobe I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. But it was the personal touches that really devastated me. Framed photos of Marcus and Sophia on the nightstand. Pictures from trips I didn't know they'd taken, restaurants I'd never heard him mention, moments of happiness that had been carefully hidden from me. A bottle of wine from the same vineyard where we'd honeymooned, but clearly purchased for a different romantic occasion. On the kitchen counter, I found a handwritten note in Marcus's distinctive penmanship. Sophia, thank you for making me remember what it feels like to be truly alive. You've given me a future I never thought I could have. All my love, M. The note was dated 3 weeks ago. While I'd been working late to finalize the purchase of a new commercial property downtown, Marcus had been writing love letters to another woman, promising her a future that presumably didn't include his wife. I photographed everything. The personal, belongings, the romantic photos, the love note, the evidence that this was far more than an affair. This was Marcus's alternate life, carefully constructed over 8 months while I remained completely oblivious. In the bedroom, I found something that made my hands shake with rage. A jewelry box containing a diamond engagement ring. Not just any ring, a custom design from Worthington's, Charleston's most exclusive jeweler, where Marcus and I had bought my wedding ring 16 years ago. The receipt was tucked beneath the ring box. $8,000 for a 1.2-carat solitaire, purchased 6 weeks ago while I was in New Orleans settling my late aunt's estate. Marcus had used that trip as an opportunity to buy an engagement ring for his mistress, probably telling Sophia some story about wanting to surprise her. I sat on their bed, holding the engagement ring that my husband had purchased for another woman, and finally understood the full scope of his betrayal. This wasn't just an affair that might eventually burn out. Marcus was planning to divorce me and marry Sophia. He'd been strategically building a new relationship while keeping me as his financial safety net until he was ready to make the transition. The cruelest part was realizing how naive I'd been. All those nights when Marcus came home late claiming client dinners or networking events, he'd actually been here, playing house with a woman young enough to be our daughter. All those weekends when he'd seemed distracted or distant, he'd been thinking about the life he was building with someone else. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Golf running long, don't wait up for dinner, we'll grab something." With the guys. I looked around the apartment where my husband had been living his secret life, then typed back, "No problem, enjoy your evening." But instead of leaving, I decided to wait. If Marcus was lying about golf, if he was planning to spend Saturday evening with Sophia, I wanted to document that too. I positioned myself in the living room with a clear view of the parking lot and settled in to see how deep this deception really went. At 6:30 p.m., they returned. I watched through the window as Marcus and Sophia got out of his car, laughing about something, carrying shopping bags from the upscale farmers market downtown. They looked like any other happy couple coming home after a day of errands and dating. For the next 3 hours, I had a front row seat to the domestic life my husband had been hiding from me. I watched them cook dinner together in the kitchen, sharing wine and intimate conversation. I watched them curl up on the couch to watch a movie, Sophia's head on Marcus's shoulder like they'd been together for years instead of months. And I watched Marcus kiss Sophia goodnight at 9:45 p.m. before leaving to come home to me. The drive back to our penthouse felt surreal. By the time Marcus walked through our front door at 10:20 p.m., I was sitting at our kitchen island with a glass of wine, pretending to review property management reports. "How was golf?" I asked without looking up from my laptop. "Great. Shot an 82, which isn't terrible for this time of year. Trevor's pudding is still garbage, though." The lie came so easily, delivered with the same casual confidence he'd always had. "Sounds fun. I missed you today." This was a test. I wanted to see if he felt any guilt at all about spending the entire day with another woman. Marcus kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly. "Missed you too, sweetheart. I'm pretty tired, though. Think I'll head up to bed." As I listened to him brush his teeth in our bathroom using the same toothbrush he'd been using at Sophia's apartment, I realized that my husband had become a complete stranger. The man I'd fallen in love with in college, the partner I'd built a life with, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my financial future. That man had been replaced by someone who could look me in the eye and lie without blinking. But Marcus had made one crucial error in his carefully orchestrated deception. He'd forgotten that I wasn't just his wife. I was a businesswoman who'd built an empire by understanding leverage, identifying weaknesses, and never entering a negotiation without holding all the cards. And now, I held all the cards in a game. He didn't even know we were playing. The evidence I'd gathered over the past week wasn't just about documenting his betrayal. It was about understanding the full scope of his vulnerabilities. Marcus thought he was planning his escape from our marriage, but he'd actually trapped himself in a situation where I controlled every aspect of his new life. The apartment where he'd been playing house? I owned it. The lease that gave him access to his romantic hideaway? I could terminate it. The woman he was planning to marry. She was my employee's employee, financially dependent on keeping her job at a firm where one phone call from me could raise serious questions about her professional judgment. Marcus had spent 8 months building his perfect exit strategy, never realizing that he'd been handing me the tools to destroy everything he thought he was gaining. Tomorrow, I would start making some phone calls of my own. Monday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive Charleston humidity that made even thinking feel exhausting. I sat in my downtown office staring at the evidence I'd compiled over the weekend. Photos, documents, receipts, and a timeline that painted a picture of systematic deception so thorough it took my breath away. But having evidence and knowing what to do with it were two entirely different things. I was drowning in the paralysis of too many options. I could confront Marcus directly, but that would just give him time to spin the situation or make his own strategic moves. I could expose the affair to his colleagues at Palmetto Wealth Management, but that might backfire and make me look vindictive. I could evict Sophia from the apartment, but that would reveal my hand before I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. What I needed was advice from someone who understood power dynamics, someone who'd navigated complex business, relationships, someone who could help me see the strategic possibilities I was missing. That's when I remembered Isabella Montenegro. Isabella was Charleston's most feared and respected divorce attorney, a woman who'd built her reputation dismantling the marriages of South Carolina's wealthiest families. She was also, coincidentally, a former client. 3 years ago, I'd helped her find the perfect downtown office space when she was expanding her practice. We'd developed a mutual respect during that transaction. She appreciated my business acumen, and I admired her strategic thinking. More importantly, Isabella had a reputation for playing chess while her opponents were still learning checkers. I called her office and managed to get an appointment for that afternoon. Her secretary, recognizing my name, squeezed me in during what was usually her lunch break. When powerful women needed to talk to other powerful women in Charleston, schedules got rearranged. Isabella's office was everything you'd expect from someone who specialized in high-stakes divorce warfare. Floor-to-ceiling law books, diplomas from Harvard and Yale, and photographs of her with governors, senators, and judges. But what caught my attention was the wall of framed newspaper clippings documenting her most famous victories, cases where she'd secured her clients not just financial settlements, but complete strategic destruction of cheating spouses who'd underestimated her. "Vivian Beaumont," Isabella said, standing to greet me with the kind of firm handshake that suggested she could crush bones if necessary. I have to say, when my secretary told me you needed an urgent consultation, I was intrigued. You don't strike me as the type of woman who needs legal advice unless something very interesting is happening. Isabella was in her early 50s, with silver hair styled in a sharp bob, and wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had the kind of presence that made opposing counsel nervous and judges pay attention. If I was going to war with Marcus, I wanted her in my corner. "Isabella, I need your advice about a situation that's both personal and potentially very lucrative from a strategic standpoint." Her eyebrows raised with interest. "Those are my favorite kind of cases. Tell me everything." I laid out the entire story: Marcus's affair, Sophia's residency in my property, the engagement ring, the 8 months of systematic deception, and most importantly, the fact that neither of them realized I held all the power in this situation. Isabella listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes or asking for clarification about dates and financial details. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair with the kind of smile that had probably made many cheating husbands very nervous over the years. "Vivian, in 30 years of practicing divorce law, I have never seen a case where the wronged spouse held this level of strategic advantage. Your husband hasn't just committed adultery. He's handed you a masterclass in leverage." "What do you mean?" "Think about it systematically. Marcus believes he's orchestrating his escape from your marriage. But he's actually trapped himself in a web of dependencies that you control completely. The apartment where he's conducting his affair? You own it. His girlfriend's housing situation? You determine it. His professional reputation? One conversation with the right people could destroy it. Isabella pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what looked like a battle plan. But here's the beautiful part. Neither Marcus nor Sophia understands the power dynamic they've walked into. They think they're playing a game where they hold the cards. In reality, you're not even playing the same game they are. So what game am I playing? You're playing chess, and they're playing checkers. Marcus thinks he needs to choose between his wife and his girlfriend. Sophia thinks she needs to keep her affair secret until Marcus is ready to leave his marriage. But you get to decide the terms of engagement for both of them. Isabella's strategic mind was already working through possibilities I hadn't even considered. She began outlining scenarios that made my head spin with their complexity and potential impact. Option 1. The nuclear approach. Expose everything simultaneously. Confront Marcus with evidence, inform Sophia's employer about the inappropriate relationship, and evict her from the apartment. Maximum damage, maximum drama, but it ends the game quickly. Option 2. The slow burn. Use your leverage strategically, over time. Let them think they're getting away with it while you systematically dismantle their foundation. This requires more patience, but offers more control over the outcome. Option 3. The power play. Don't just end the affair. Use your position to create a situation where they both become completely dependent on your mercy. This is the most sophisticated approach, but it requires careful timing and exceptional strategic thinking. I found myself leaning forward, fascinated by the possibilities. What would option 3 actually look like? Isabella's smile became positively predatory. Imagine if Sophia's lease renewal required approval from the building owner. That's you. Imagine if Marcus's professional reputation depended on avoiding scandal, something you could control with a few well-placed conversations. Imagine if their entire relationship could only continue with your permission, even though they don't realize you're the one granting it. The implications were staggering. Instead of being the victim of their affair, I could become the puppet master, controlling every aspect of their relationship. But Isabella, is that legal? Ethical? Legal? Absolutely. You're a business owner making decisions about your properties and your professional relationships. Ethical? She shrugged. Your husband spent 8 months systematically deceiving you, while creating financial and emotional dependencies. Your tenant entered into a lease arrangement while conducting an affair with your spouse. They created this situation. You're just responding to it strategically. There's something else you should consider, Isabella continued, pulling out another file. I've been tracking property values in Charleston for divorce cases, and your portfolio has appreciated significantly over the past 2 years. If Marcus files for divorce, he'd be entitled to a substantial portion of your real estate empire under South Carolina's equitable distribution laws. This was something I hadn't considered. In my focus on the emotional betrayal, I'd overlooked the financial implications. If Marcus left me for Sophia, he could potentially claim ownership of properties I'd acquired and developed entirely through my own efforts. How much could he claim? Conservatively, $4 to $6 million, depending on how the court values your contributions versus his during the marriage. And if he argues that his income helped support the household while you were building the business, potentially more. The thought of Marcus walking away with millions of dollars of my real estate empire to start a new life with Sophia made my blood boil. I'd built this portfolio through years of strategic planning, careful investment, and relentless work. The idea that he could destroy our marriage and then claim half of everything I'd built was unacceptable. But, Isabella continued with another one of her strategic smiles, if Marcus were to be found at fault for adultery, if there were evidence of systematic deception and financial misconduct, if his behavior could be characterized as abandonment or constructive desertion, those calculations change dramatically. What kind of evidence would I need? The kind you've already been collecting. But Vivian, here's the key insight. The evidence becomes much more powerful if it's gathered systematically over time, documenting a pattern of behavior rather than just isolated incidents. Isabella leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. I'm going to give you some advice that goes beyond legal strategy. You have an opportunity here that most wronged spouses never get. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to be an architect of justice. But if you choose the latter, you need to be prepared for the long game. What does the long game look like? It looks like giving Marcus and Sophia enough rope to hang themselves. It looks like documenting every lie, every deception, every financial decision they make based on their false assumptions about your ignorance. It looks like positioning yourself so that when you finally reveal your hand, they have no options left except the ones you give them. And how long would something like that take? 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly they escalate their relationship and how many mistakes they make along the way. But Vivian, here's the crucial question. Do you want revenge or do you want victory? The distinction hit me like lightning. Revenge was emotional, immediate, satisfying in the short term but potentially costly in the long run. Victory was strategic, comprehensive, and permanent. I want victory, I heard myself say. Then we're going to need a plan that's worthy of the woman who built a $12 million real estate empire from a single duplex inheritance. Are you ready to play the kind of chess that Marcus and Sophia will never see coming? As I sat in Isabella's office, surrounded by the evidence of her previous victories and the strategic possibilities she was laying out, I realized that this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about power, leverage, and the choice between being someone who things happened to or someone who made things happen. Marcus had spent 8 months thinking he was writing the script for his new life. It was time to show him who the real author was. Isabella's strategic framework gave me the clarity I'd been missing, but implementing a long-term plan required resources and allies I couldn't manage alone. The next morning, I called Carolina into my office and made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I was going to bring her into my inner circle. Carolina, I need to ask you to do something that goes beyond normal property management duties, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you must remain completely confidential. Her expression shifted to serious attention. Carolina had worked for me long enough to know that when I used that tone, something significant was happening. Of course, Mrs. Beaumont. What do you need? I laid out the entire situation, Marcus's affair, Sophia's residency in my building, and most importantly, my decision to document everything systematically rather than confronting them immediately. Carolina's eyes widened as she understood. The implications. You want me to help you gather evidence of your husband's affair? Mrs. Beaumont, I'm honored that you trust me, but isn't this something for a private investigator? A private investigator would be obvious and expensive, and they wouldn't have the access we have. You're the property manager. You have legitimate reasons to be at Willowbrook Gardens regularly, to notice patterns, to document activities that affect the property. Most importantly, neither Marcus nor Sophia would ever suspect that you're working directly for me on this. Carolina nodded slowly as she processed the strategic advantages of our position. What exactly do you need me to do? I pulled out a detailed plan I'd developed after my meeting with Isabella. I need systematic documentation of their activities. Arrival and departure times, frequency of visits, any packages or deliveries, maintenance requests, noise complaints from neighbors, utility usage patterns that suggest overnight stays. Anything that establishes this is more than casual dating. I can definitely do that. The management office has security cameras covering the parking areas and building entrances. I could pull footage systematically. This was exactly the kind of thinking I needed. Perfect. But Carolina, we need to be completely professional about this. No personal opinions, no emotional reactions, just factual documentation that would hold up in legal proceedings. Legal proceedings? Mrs. Beaumont, are you planning to divorce him? I'm planning to have options, and the stronger my evidence, the better my options will be. Over the next week, Carolina proved to be an invaluable ally. Her daily reports painted a picture of Marcus and Sophia's relationship that was even more systematic than I'd realized. They had established routines, patterns, and behaviors that suggested a level of commitment that went far beyond a casual affair. Marcus visited Sophia's apartment 4 days a week, always arriving between 11:30 a.m. and 12:15 p.m., always staying, for approximately 3 hours. On weekends, he typically arrived Saturday morning and didn't leave until Sunday evening. The utility usage data Carolina accessed showed significantly higher electricity and water consumption than typical for a single-person apartment, confirming that Marcus was essentially living there part-time, but it was the delivery information that provided the most damning evidence. Over the past 2 months, packages had been delivered to Unit 14, addressed to both Sophia Chen and Marcus Beaumont. Expensive items from Williams-Sonoma, Pottery Barn, and Sur La Table, the kind of household purchases that couples make when they're building a life together. Mrs. Beaumont, Carolina said during our Friday briefing, I think you need to see this week's security footage personally. She queued up video from Wednesday afternoon, showing Marcus and Sophia returning from what appeared to be a shopping trip. But this time, they weren't alone. A woman in her 60s, well-dressed and clearly comfortable with both of them, helped carry packages up to the apartment. Do you recognize her? Carolina asked. I studied the footage and felt my heart sink. That's Marcus's mother, Patricia Beaumont. She's meeting his girlfriend. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just an affair Marcus was keeping secret from me. He'd introduced Sophia to his family. His mother, who'd welcomed me into their social circle 16 years ago, who'd hosted our wedding reception at the family estate, who'd been sending me birthday cards and Christmas gifts for nearly 2 decades, was now apparently accepting another woman as her son's partner. There's more, Carolina said gently. The same woman visited again on Friday, this time bringing what looked like family photos in frames. And yesterday, a woman who appears to be significantly younger, maybe late 20s or early 30s, visited for about 2 hours. I requested copies of all the footage. Watching Marcus introduce Sophia to what appeared to be his sister made me realize that I wasn't just dealing with a secret affair. I was looking at a man who'd been systematically integrating his mistress into his family structure while keeping me completely isolated from his real life. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just been lying to me about where he was spending his time. He'd been building an entire alternate family structure, complete with introductions, approval, and what appeared to be enthusiastic acceptance from the people who'd once considered me their daughter-in-law. But the most devastating discovery came when I decided to dig deeper into Marcus's financial activities. As someone who managed a complex real estate portfolio, I understood the importance of tracking money flows, and I realized I'd been naive about our joint finances. I called our accountant, Robert Chen, ironically no relation to Sophia despite the shared surname, and requested detailed statements for all of our joint accounts, credit cards, and investment portfolios for the past year. Vivian, is there a specific issue you're concerned about? These records are quite extensive. I'm conducting a comprehensive financial review for estate planning purposes, I said, which was technically true even if not for the reasons Robert assumed. I need to understand all of our financial activities and obligations. The records that arrived by courier that afternoon told a story that made my hands shake with rage. Over the past 8 months, Marcus had systematically redirected money from our joint accounts to cover expenses I'd never authorized or even known about. $3,200 to Worthington's Jewelers, Not just the engagement ring I'd found, but apparently additional jewelry purchases. $5,800 to Charleston's most exclusive restaurant for what appeared to be monthly romantic dinners. $2,400 to a luxury hotel in Savannah for a weekend getaway I'd never heard about. $1,600 to a spa resort in Asheville for what the records described as a couples retreat. But the most infuriating discovery was a series of transfers totaling $12,000 to something called SB Consulting Services. When I researched the business registration, I discovered that SB Consulting Services was a recently formed LLC with Sophia Blake as the registered owner. Marcus had been giving his mistress money. Not just paying for their dates and getaways, but actually transferring cash to her business account, essentially providing her with financial support that she was probably using to supplement her income and maintain the lifestyle their affair required. I was subsidizing my husband's affair through our joint marital assets. The phone call I made to Isabella that evening was brief but decisive. Isabella, it's Vivian. I need to accelerate our timeline. Marcus isn't just having an affair. He's been systematically transferring marital assets to support his girlfriend's business and financing their relationship with money from our joint accounts. How much money are we talking about? Over $30,000 in 8 months, and that's just what I've found so far. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Isabella responded with the kind of controlled fury that had made her Charleston's most feared divorce attorney. Vivian, your husband just committed financial adultery, in addition to regular adultery. In South Carolina, that's grounds for immediate action to protect marital assets. We're not waiting 3 to 6 months anymore. We're moving to the next phase now. What does that mean? It means Marcus and Sophia just handed us everything we need to control this situation completely. Asset misappropriation during an extramarital affair is one of the fastest ways to lose property rights in a divorce. But more importantly, it gives us leverage to force a resolution on our terms rather than waiting for them to make more mistakes. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow, you're going to have a conversation with Sophia Chen, not as the wronged wife, but as her landlord. And Marcus is going to discover that his perfect little escape plan just became a whole lot more complicated. I hung up the phone. I realized that my week of systematic investigation had revealed something crucial that changed everything. Marcus and Sophia weren't just having an affair. They were building a business partnership, a financial relationship, and a family structure that involved my money, my property, and people who'd once been my allies. But they'd made a critical error. In their eagerness to build their new life together, they'd created a paper trail, established patterns, and made financial commitments that gave me legal standing to dismantle everything they thought they were building. The evidence I'd been gathering wasn't just about documenting their betrayal anymore. It was about proving that Marcus had been systematically misappropriating marital assets to support an extramarital relationship, which in South Carolina's fault-based divorce system meant I could potentially claim not just my own property, but a significant portion of his assets as well. Marcus thought he was planning his escape from our marriage. What he'd actually done was build a legal and financial trap that was about to spring shut around both of them. The investigation phase was over. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Tuesday. Morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Charleston feel like anything was possible. I stood in my walk-in closet, selecting my outfit with the same strategic precision I'd use for a major business negotiation. Today wasn't about confronting my husband's mistress as a wronged wife. Today was about establishing myself as the landlord who held all the power in this situation. I chose my navy Armani suit, the one that commanded respect in boardrooms, paired with the Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to my height and made me feel like I could conquer the world. I pulled my hair back in a sleek chignon and applied makeup with the kind of precision that suggested I was a woman who didn't make mistakes or accept excuses. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The devastated wife who'd discovered Her husband's betrayal 2 weeks ago had been replaced by someone harder, sharper, more calculating. This transformation wasn't just about clothes and makeup. It was about reclaiming my identity as Vivian Beaumont, successful businesswoman, instead of continuing to define myself as Marcus's betrayed spouse. I'd spent 2 weeks gathering evidence and understanding the scope of their deception. Now it was time to take control of the narrative. At exactly 10 a.m., I arrived at Willowbrook Gardens in my Mercedes, parking in the spot marked building owner that I'd never actually used before. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Today, I wasn't visiting as someone's wife. I was here as the person who owned the ground they were standing on. Carolina met me at the management office, her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Beaumont, Miss Chen should be returning from her morning jog in about 15 minutes. She follows a very predictable routine." "Perfect. Have you prepared the documentation I requested?" Carolina handed me a thick folder containing lease renewal forms, property compliance requirements, and most importantly, a new addendum to the rental agreement that would give me unprecedented oversight of Unit 14's activities. Everything's here, including the updated occupancy restrictions and guest policy limitations. If she signs this, any overnight visitors will require landlord approval, and lease violations could result in immediate termination. The beauty of the addendum was its apparent legitimacy. Charleston's rental market had become increasingly regulated over the past year, with new city ordinances requiring landlords to monitor property usage more carefully. Sophia would have no reason to suspect that these new requirements were specifically designed to control her relationship with Marcus. At 10:17 a.m., I watched Sophia return from her jog, looking impossibly young and energetic in her athletic wear. She had the kind of effortless beauty that came from being 26 years old and believing the world was full of unlimited possibilities. In a few minutes, I was going to teach her that possibilities were often controlled by people she'd never considered. I gave her 10 minutes to shower and change, then knocked on the door of Unit 14 with the confident authority of someone who had every right to be there. Sophia answered the door wearing a casual sundress, her hair still damp from the shower, clearly expecting a package delivery or maintenance worker. When she saw me in my business suit, her expression shifted to confusion. "Mrs. Beaumont, what a surprise. Is everything okay with the building?" "Hello, Sophia. Actually, I'm here to discuss some important updates to your lease agreement. May I come in?" The moment of recognition when Sophia realized this wasn't a casual landlord visit was fascinating to watch. Her smile became more forced, her posture more defensive, but she couldn't refuse to let her landlord into the apartment without seeming suspicious. "Of course, please come in. Can I offer you some coffee?" I stepped into the apartment that had become the stage for my husband's secret life, maintaining perfect professional composure despite recognizing furniture I'd seen Marcus shopping for, artwork that reflected his taste, and personal touches that suggested this was far more than just Sophia's apartment. "Coffee would be lovely. Thank you." As Sophia moved around the kitchen, I positioned myself where I could observe the living space while appearing to review the paperwork in my folder. The apartment told the story of two people building a life together. Shared books on the coffee table, his cologne on the bathroom counter visible through the open door, a second coffee mug in the sink that suggested this morning's routine had included someone else. "So?" Sophia said, handing me a mug and settling onto the couch with carefully casual body language. "What kind of lease updates are we talking about?" "Charleston has implemented new rental regulations that require more stringent monitoring of property usage. As you know, your lease specifies single occupancy residency, but we've been getting reports of regular overnight guests that may violate those terms." I watched Sophia's face carefully as she processed this information. The slight flush in her cheeks, the way her hand tightened around her coffee mug, the momentary pause before she responded, all signs that she understood exactly what I was referring to. "I hope there haven't been any complaints from neighbors. I try to be very respectful of the community guidelines. No formal complaints yet, but the new city regulations require landlords to document all long-term guests and overnight visitors. If someone is staying here more than 2 nights per week regularly, they need to be added to the lease as an official resident, which includes background checks, income verification, and additional security deposits. This was completely fabricated, but Sophia had no way of knowing that. I delivered the information with the kind of authoritative confidence that made it sound like established policy rather than strategic manipulation. I see. And what would that process involve? Well, that depends on who we're talking about. The documentation requirements vary based on the guest's employment status, marital status, and existing financial obligations. For instance, if someone is married, we need spousal consent for any additional lease responsibilities. The word married hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. Sophia's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips as she understood that this conversation had just shifted from administrative to personal. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to be honest about who's been staying in this apartment regularly, because the new regulations require complete transparency about occupancy. If there are unreported residents, that's grounds for immediate lease termination. I could see Sophia's mind racing as she tried to calculate how much I knew versus how much I was guessing. The problem with being 26 years old and having an affair with a married man was that you tend to assume the wife is clueless rather than strategic. There's something else, I continued, pulling out another document from my folder. We've had some concerns about potential business activities being conducted from residential units. The lease specifically prohibits commercial use, but we've noticed some unusual financial transactions associated with this address. This was Sophia's SB Consulting Services LLC registration, which listed Unit 14 as the business address. Another violation she probably thought was insignificant, but which gave me additional leverage. I run a small consulting business, but it's just administrative work. Nothing that would violate residential usage guidelines. Consulting in what area? Financial planning and business development. I nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable, while internally noting that Sophia had just admitted to running a business that put her in direct competition with Marcus's employer. Another piece of information that could prove useful. Sophia, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe in honest communication. This apartment has become the subject of some attention that could affect your ability to renew your lease. I'm here today to offer you an opportunity to address those concerns proactively. What kind of attention? The kind that happens when someone's personal life intersects with their professional responsibilities in ways that could create complications for everyone involved. I let that statement settle while Sophia processed its implications. She was intelligent enough to understand that I was talking about her relationship with Marcus, but still young enough to believe she could manage the situation with the right explanations. Mrs. Beaumont, if someone has said something inappropriate about my personal life, I hope you understand that I maintain very professional boundaries in all of my relationships. I'm sure you do. But Sophia, here's what I need you to understand. I've been in business for 20 years, and I've learned that the most successful relationships are built on complete transparency. Right now, you're in a situation where lack of transparency could cost you not just your housing, but potentially your professional reputation as well. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I was offering her a chance to confess and potentially negotiate, or face the consequences of continuing to lie to someone who clearly knew more than she'd assumed. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me understand the full scope of what's been happening in this apartment, so that we can find a solution that protects everyone's interests, including yours. Sophia set down her coffee mug and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. In her eyes, I could see the moment when she realized that this conversation wasn't about lease violations or city regulations. This was about power, and she was just beginning to understand how little of it she actually had. Mrs. Beaumont, I think maybe I should consult with someone before we continue this conversation. That's certainly your right. But Sophia, consulting with the wrong person could make this situation much more complicated than it needs to be, especially if that person has been giving you advice based on incomplete information about who they're dealing with. I stood up, straightening my suit jacket with the kind of authority that came from knowing I held all the cards in this negotiation. I'm going to leave these documents with you to review. Take your time, think carefully about your options, and call me when you're ready to have a more complete conversation. But Sophia, understand that this situation is going to be resolved one way or another. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. As I walked toward the door, I turned back for one final strategic move. Oh, and Sophia? When you're considering your options, you might want to ask yourself whether the person who's been advising you about this relationship has been completely honest about his own situation. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones keeping the biggest secrets. I left her sitting in the apartment that Marcus thought was their safe haven, holding lease documents that would give me legal control over their relationship. Finally understanding that the naive young woman was about to go up against a business owner who'd built an empire by never entering a negotiation without holding all the advantages. The transformation was complete. I was no longer Marcus's betrayed wife. I was Vivian Beaumont, and I was just getting started. I didn't have to wait long to see the results of my conversation with Sophia. That evening, Marcus came home earlier than he had in months, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd rarely seen before: genuine anxiety. He paced around our penthouse kitchen like a caged animal, checking his phone obsessively and making himself a bourbon at 6 p.m., which was unusual for someone who typically waited until after dinner to drink. "Everything all right?" I asked from my position at the kitchen island, where I was reviewing property reports with deliberate casualness. "You seem tense." "Just work stress. Some complicated client situations that need attention." The lie came out strained, lacking his usual smooth delivery. Whatever Sophia had told him about my visit had clearly rattled him more than he was willing to admit. "Anything I can help with?" "You know I'm good with complicated situations." Marcus shot me a look that was part suspicion, part guilt, and entirely uncomfortable. "No, it's just internal firm politics. Nothing that would interest you." I nodded sympathetically while internally noting that he'd just lied to me again. This time about something I knew had nothing to do with Palmetto Wealth Management and everything to do with his increasingly complicated personal life. At 8:30 p.m., Marcus's phone rang. I watched his expression as he glanced at the caller ID, a mixture of relief and apprehension that suggested this was the call he'd been waiting for all evening. "I need to take this," he said, walking toward his home office. "Client emergency." But our penthouse had excellent acoustics, and Marcus had never been particularly good at whispering when he was stressed. From the kitchen, I could hear fragments of his conversation that confirmed exactly what I'd expected. "Don't understand how she could know. Never mentioned anything about new regulations. Need to be more careful about. Maybe we should take a break until..." The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and by the time Marcus returned to the living room, he looked like a man who'd just realized his carefully constructed alternate life was developing serious structural problems. "Everything resolved?" I asked innocently. "For now. But Vivian, I might need to work some longer hours over the next few weeks. Big project that requires extensive coordination." "Of course. You know I support your career ambitions." The irony of my response wasn't lost on either of us, though for very different reasons. Over the next 3 days, I watched Marcus's behavior change dramatically. The confident man who'd been conducting his affair with casual indifference was replaced by someone who jumped every time his phone rang, who seemed nervous about leaving the penthouse, and who kept asking vague questions about my property management activities. "Do you ever do personal visits to your rental properties?" he asked Thursday morning over coffee. "Sometimes." "Why?" just curious about your day-to-day operations. You've been so successful with the business, but I realize I don't really understand all the details of how you manage everything." This was Marcus fishing for information, trying to understand whether my visit to Sophia had been routine property management or something more targeted. The fact that he was asking suggested Sophia hadn't been entirely honest with him about our conversation, which created exactly the kind of uncertainty I wanted. Property management requires attention to detail and personal relationships with tenants, I said. "You'd be surprised how much people appreciate when the building owner takes a personal interest in their living situation." Marcus's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "Do you know most of your tenants personally?" "The interesting ones, certainly. Especially the ones with unique situations or special needs." I could practically see the wheels turning in Marcus's head as he tried to decode whether I was speaking generally or specifically about Sophia. The beauty of strategic ambiguity was that it forced him to reveal his own concerns while I maintained plausible deniability. Friday afternoon brought the phone call I'd been expecting. Sophia's name appeared on my business line, and her voice carried the kind of forced professionalism that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "Mrs. Beaumont, this is Sophia Chen from Unit 14. I've reviewed the documentation you left with me, and I have some questions about the lease modifications." "Of course. Would you prefer to discuss this over the phone or in person?" "In person would be better. Would you have time this afternoon?" "I'll be there at 4 p.m. When I arrived at Willowbrook Gardens for the second time that week, Sophia had clearly prepared for a different kind of conversation. She'd dressed professionally in a business suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and she'd arranged the apartment to look as much like a single-person residence as possible. Marcus's personal belongings had been carefully hidden, or removed, though she couldn't disguise the fact that the refrigerator was stocked for 2 people or that there were masculine toiletries in the bathroom. "Mrs. Beaumont, thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss the lease modifications and clarify some concerns about compliance." "I appreciate your proactive approach, Sophia. What specific concerns do you have?" "Well, I've been researching the city regulations you mentioned, and I couldn't find any documentation about new occupancy monitoring requirements. Could you provide me with the specific ordinance numbers so I can review the legal requirements myself?" This was Sophia calling my bluff, which I'd expected. She was intelligent enough to do her own research, and she'd probably consulted with Marcus about the legitimacy of my claims. The question was whether she was prepared for what came next. "Sophia, I think we need to have a more honest conversation about what's really happening here." I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the photographic evidence I'd been collecting for the past 2 weeks. Images of Marcus's car in the visitor parking space, security footage of him entering and leaving the building, delivery records showing packages addressed to both of them. These photos were taken over the past 14 days. They show a pattern of occupancy that clearly violates your single-person lease agreement. More importantly, they show a relationship that puts both you and your guest in a very vulnerable position. Sophia's professional composure cracked as she realized I wasn't just fishing for information. I had systematic documentation of their entire affair. "Mrs. Beaumont, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But before you do, I want you to understand something important. The man who's been staying in this apartment regularly, who's been helping you furnish this space, who's been contributing to your business expenses, is my husband of 16 years. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Sophia's face went white as she processed the full implications of what I'd just revealed. You're Marcus's wife?" "I am, and you're having an affair with him in an apartment building that I own, using money from our joint marital accounts to support a relationship that could cost you your job, your housing, and your professional reputation." Sophia sank into the couch, all pretense of professional negotiation abandoned. "Oh my God, Marcus told me he was divorced. He said the separation was just waiting for final paperwork." This was exactly what I'd suspected. Marcus had been lying to both of us, telling me he was working late while telling Sophia he was free to start a new relationship. Neither of us had been operating with complete information about his actual situation. Sophia, Marcus, and I are still very much married, still living together, and still sharing financial accounts that he's been using to fund your relationship. Every dinner you've shared, every gift he's given you, every dollar that's gone into your consulting business has come from marital assets that legally belong to both of us. The devastation on Sophia's face was almost painful to watch. She wasn't just learning that her boyfriend had lied to her about his marital status. She was discovering that she'd unknowingly become complicit in financial fraud and asset misappropriation. I had no idea. Mrs. Beaumont, you have to believe me. If I had known he was still married, I would never have. I believe you, Sophia, which is why I'm here to offer you a way out of this situation that protects your interests instead of destroying them. What do you mean? I pulled out a document that Isabella had prepared for exactly this scenario. This is a confidential settlement agreement. If you sign it, you agree to terminate your relationship with Marcus immediately, provide testimony about the financial transfers he's made to your business, and cooperate with documentation of asset misappropriation during divorce proceedings. And if I don't sign it? Then I file eviction proceedings based on lease violations, contact your employer about the inappropriate relationship with a client's spouse, and pursue legal action for recovery of marital assets that were fraudulently transferred to your business account. Sophia stared at the document, understanding that I was offering her a choice between cooperation and complete destruction of the life she'd built in Charleston. What happens to Marcus if I sign this? Marcus faces the consequences of his own choices. He lied to both of us, Sophia. He put you in an impossible position by making you unknowingly complicit in adultery and financial fraud. This isn't your fault, but it is your problem unless you take steps to protect yourself. How long do I have to decide? 48 hours. After that, I move forward with legal proceedings regardless of your decision. As I prepared to leave, Sophia's voice stopped me at the door. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm so sorry. I really believed he was divorced. I thought I was helping him start over after a difficult separation. Sophia, you're 26 years old and you trusted someone who presented himself as available. Marcus is 43 years old, and he systematically deceived both of us for 8 months. Don't apologize for being the victim of his manipulation. I left her in the apartment that had been their love nest, holding a legal document that would either save her future or seal her fate, finally understanding that the man she'd fallen in love with had been lying about everything that mattered. The C. Phone call I received at 11 p.m. that night was from Marcus, and his voice carried a level of panic I'd never heard before. Vivian, we need to talk. Right now. About what? You know exactly what. How long have you known? The question I'd been waiting weeks to hear. Marcus had finally realized that his wife wasn't the oblivious partner he'd been counting on. Known about what, Marcus? You'll need to be more specific. About Sophia. About the apartment. About everything. I've known about everything since the day I watched you kiss her in the parking lot of a building I own. The question is, what are you planning to do about it? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had just realized that his perfect escape plan had been under surveillance from the very beginning, and the woman he'd been trying to leave behind was actually the one holding all the power. Saturday morning arrived with Marcus pacing our penthouse like a trapped animal, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls he refused to answer in my presence. The confident man who'd been living a double life for 8 months had been replaced by someone who flinched every time I entered a room, as if expecting me to drop another strategic bombshell. Sophia signed the settlement agreement, I announced. Over breakfast, setting the document on our kitchen island where Marcus couldn't avoid seeing it. His coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. She what? She signed it at 2 a.m. through my attorney's emergency service. Full cooperation with asset recovery, detailed testimony about financial transfers, and immediate termination of your relationship. She also provided copies of all the business records for SB Consulting Services, including the bank statements showing every deposit you made from our joint accounts. Marcus's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something approaching terror as he processed what Sophia's cooperation meant for his situation. You can't be serious. Vivian, this is vindictive. This is business, Marcus. You misappropriated marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship. Sophia was smart enough to protect herself by cooperating with the investigation. You might want to consider whether you're prepared to do the same. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text message I'd received an hour earlier. Mrs. Beaumont, I've moved out of the apartment and ended all contact with Marcus. Thank you for showing me who he really is. I'll provide whatever testimony you need. Sophia. She's gone, Marcus. Packed her belongings, terminated her lease early, and according to my sources, submitted her resignation to Palmetto Wealth Management effective immediately. Apparently, she's decided Charleston isn't the right place for her career development after all. The devastating impact of losing Sophia hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not just the end of their relationship, but the complete elimination of the alternate life he'd been building for 8 months. Where did she go? I have no idea, and frankly, it's irrelevant. What matters is that she's provided enough documentation to support asset recovery claims totaling approximately $47,000. That's what you've spent on your affair, Marcus. $47,000 of our money to build a relationship with someone who was smart enough to abandon you the moment she understood what you really are. I handed him another document that Isabella had prepared overnight. This is a post-nuptial agreement. If you sign it, you acknowledge the asset misappropriation, agree to full financial disclosure of all extramarital expenditures, and accept a revised property division that protects my business assets in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution for financial fraud. Marcus stared at the legal document like it was written in a foreign language. Criminal prosecution? Vivian, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You systematically transferred money from joint marital accounts to support an extramarital relationship and fund your girlfriend's business. In South Carolina, that's criminal conversion of marital property. Isabella has already filed a motion to freeze our joint accounts pending investigation, and she's prepared to pursue criminal charges if you don't cooperate with full asset recovery. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized the legal trap he'd walked into. How long have you been planning this? I haven't been planning anything, Marcus. I've been responding to your choices. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every month you spent building a relationship with another woman while married to me, those were your decisions. I just documented them professionally. My phone rang with a call from Carolina. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend, but there's been an interesting development at Willowbrook Gardens. Unit 14 is vacant, and we have 3 prospective tenants interested in viewing it this afternoon. Should I schedule showings? Absolutely. And Carolina, make sure you mention in the listing that this unit has been recently renovated and is available for immediate occupancy. No need to mention the previous tenant's abrupt departure. I hung up and smiled at Marcus, who was listening to the conversation with growing horror. The apartment where you've been living your secret life is already being shown to new tenants. Sophia left it immaculate, by the way. Very considerate of her to clean thoroughly before disappearing from your life forever. Marcus slumped into a chair at our kitchen table, the weight of his collapsed alternate reality finally hitting him. Vivian, I know I made mistakes, but this seems excessive. Can't we work something out between us without involving lawyers and legal threats? We could have worked something out 8 months ago when you decided to start lying to me about where you were spending your time and money. We could have worked something out when you decided to move your girlfriend into my building. We could have worked something out when you decided to transfer thousands of dollars to her business account without my knowledge or consent. I sat down across from him, maintaining the kind of calm professionalism that I used in difficult business negotiations. But Marcus, here's what you need to understand. I'm not the same woman who trusted your explanations about late meetings and client dinners. I'm the woman who built a $12 million real estate empire by paying attention to details and never accepting explanations that don't match the evidence. So, what happens now? Now you sign the post-nuptial agreement, cooperate with full financial disclosure, and we proceed with an amicable divorce that protects both of our interests. Or you refuse to sign, and I pursue criminal charges for asset misappropriation while seeking maximum financial penalties in divorce court. Marcus reviewed the post-nuptial agreement with the expression of someone reading his own obituary. The terms were comprehensive and heavily weighted in my favor, but they were also fair given his systematic financial betrayal. If I sign this, what do I get? You get to avoid criminal prosecution, keep your job, and maintain your professional reputation. You also get to walk away from this marriage with your personal belongings and a modest settlement that reflects your actual contributions to our joint wealth. And if I don't sign? Then you lose everything: your job, your reputation, your freedom, and any claim to property you helped acquire during our marriage. Isabella has already prepared criminal complaints and civil suits that will make your life extremely complicated for the next several years. Marcus spent the next hour reviewing the agreement with the desperate attention of someone looking for any possible escape route. But Isabella had crafted the document with the precision of someone who'd destroyed cheating spouses professionally for 30 years. Every clause, every term, every condition was designed to protect my interests while giving Marcus just enough consideration to make cooperation more attractive than warfare. At 3 p.m., Marcus signed the post-nuptial agreement. There's one more thing, I said as he set down the pen. You need to vacate the penthouse by next Friday. I've arranged for you to stay at the corporate apartment downtown until you find permanent housing. You're kicking me out of our home? Marcus, this stopped being our home the day you decided to create an alternate life with someone else. Besides, the penthouse is part of my property portfolio, purchased entirely with funds from my business. According to the agreement you just signed, you have no claim to it. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Marcus had lost his girlfriend, his secret apartment, and now his home, all within 24 hours. The life he'd been planning with Sophia had evaporated, and the marriage he'd been planning to leave behind was ending on terms that gave him minimal control over the outcome. Vivian, I want you to know that I did love you. What happened with Sophia doesn't change what we built together over 16 years. I looked at this man who'd shared my bed while planning his escape, who'd kissed me goodbye while going to spend afternoons with another woman, who'd used our money to build a relationship that excluded me completely. Marcus, love doesn't lie. For 8 months. Love doesn't steal money to fund an affair. Love doesn't introduce the other woman to your family while keeping your wife completely in the dark. What you felt for me became convenience, habit, and financial security. That's not love, that's dependence. As I watched Marcus pack his belongings into suitcases, removing 16 years of shared history from our home, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not satisfaction or vindication, but genuine relief that the lies were finally over, that the exhausting work of pretending our marriage was something it hadn't been for months was finished. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Post-nuptial executed perfectly. Asset protection complete. Criminal charges held in reserve. You've just secured one of the most advantageous divorce settlements in Charleston history. Congratulations on playing chess while he was playing checkers. By Sunday evening, Marcus was gone. The penthouse felt different without his presence. Not empty, but clean. Like a space that had been contaminated by deception, was finally able to breathe again. I stood on the balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor, watching the sunset paint the historic district in golden light, and realized that I wasn't the same woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal 3 weeks ago. That woman had been defined by her relationships, her partnerships, her role as half of someone else's success story. I was Vivian Beaumont now, landlord, business owner, strategic, negotiator, and architect of my own extraordinary future. Marcus had thought he was discarding me for a younger, simpler woman. Instead, he'd given me permission to remember exactly how powerful I'd always been when I stopped limiting myself to someone else's vision of what I should accept. The immediate victory was complete, but I was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood before the Charleston Business Development Council accepting the Entrepreneur Excellence Award for strategic real estate investment and community development. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was receiving recognition for business. Acumen at the same time, Marcus was attending court-mandated financial counseling as part of his asset recovery settlement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the council president announced to the packed ballroom at the Ocean House, "this year's recipient has not only built one of Charleston's most successful property management companies, but has also demonstrated remarkable strategic thinking in complex business situations. Please join me in congratulating Vivienne Beaumont of Magnolia Property Management." The applause was genuine and sustained. As I walked to the podium in my emerald green evening gown, the one I'd bought to celebrate closing my most recent acquisition, I felt the kind of confidence that came from knowing I'd earned every bit of recognition through my own efforts, without compromising my integrity or depending on anyone else's success. "Thank you for this incredible honor," I began, looking out at the audience of Charleston's business elite. "When I started Magnolia Property Management 8 years ago with a single duplex inheritance, I never imagined it would grow into a portfolio, spanning 4 counties and generating employment for over 30 people. What I didn't mention was that the growth had accelerated dramatically over the past 6 months. Since my divorce from Marcus had been finalized, I'd been operating with a level of strategic freedom I'd never experienced during our marriage. Without the need to consider someone else's career timeline or social preferences, I'd been able to pursue aggressive expansion opportunities that had tripled my annual revenue. The standing ovation when I finished my acceptance speech was led by Isabella Montenegro, who'd become not just my attorney but one of my closest advisors. She'd introduced me to a network of powerful women who understood that success often required making difficult decisions that prioritized results over sentiment. After the ceremony, the networking reception buzzed with conversations about my recent acquisitions. In the 6 months since Marcus had moved out, I'd purchased 3 historic buildings in downtown Charleston, converted them into luxury rental properties, and secured long-term leases with the city's most prestigious law firms and medical practices. "Vivienne, congratulations on another stellar year," said Margaret Whitfield, Charleston's deputy mayor and someone who'd become an important ally in navigating city development regulations. "I heard you're expanding into commercial real estate. Now?" The opportunity was too good to pass up. When the historic Merchants Exchange building became available, I realized it was perfect for conversion into premium office space. The location, the architecture, the potential for appreciation, everything aligned perfectly. What I didn't mention was that the Merchants Exchange building had been part of Marcus's family heritage for 3 generations. His grandfather had been forced to sell it during the Depression, and Marcus had spent years talking about wanting to buy it back someday as a legacy project. When it came on the market 2 months ago, I'd submitted the winning bid within hours. "I also heard," Margaret continued with a knowing smile, "that you've been selected for the Governor's Economic Development Advisory Committee. That's quite an honor for someone who's only been in business for 8 years. The appointment had been announced the previous week, making me the youngest woman ever selected for the committee and positioning me to influence state-level policies affecting real estate development across South Carolina. It was the kind of recognition that typically took decades to achieve, but my rapid business growth and strategic networking had accelerated the timeline considerably. The committee work will be challenging, but I'm excited about the opportunity to help shape policies that support small business development and affordable housing initiatives," I replied. Later that evening, I found myself on the Ocean House terrace overlooking Charleston Harbor, sharing champagne with a group of women who'd become my inner circle over the past 6 months. Isabella was there, along with Margaret, Dr. Rebecca Singh, who ran Charleston's largest medical practice and rented space in one of my buildings, and Carmen Rodriguez, who'd recently been promoted to senior property manager after Carolina decided to start her own real estate firm. To Vivian, Isabella raised her glass, who proved that the best revenge is building an empire while your enemies watch from the sidelines. It's not about revenge anymore, I said, surprising myself with how true that statement felt. It's about what happens when you stop limiting yourself to someone else's vision of what you should accept. Dr. Singh nodded approvingly. I've watched you transform over the past year, Vivian. You went from being half of a power couple to being the whole equation yourself. That takes real courage. The conversation turned to recent Charleston gossip, including updates on various social and professional developments around the city. It was during this casual discussion that Margaret mentioned something that made my evening even more satisfying. Did you hear about Marcus Richardson? Apparently, he's been having a difficult time since his divorce. Lost his position at Palmetto Wealth Management last month. This was news to me, though not entirely surprising. The financial counseling requirement from our settlement had made his asset misappropriation issues a matter of public record, and wealth management firms were notoriously sensitive about employees with financial scandal in their backgrounds. What's he doing now? Carmen asked. Selling insurance, from what I heard. Took a position with one of those companies that advertises on late-night television. Quite a step down from managing million-dollar portfolios for Charleston's elite families. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. Marcus had made his choices systematically over 8 months, prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term consequences. The fact that those consequences had continued to accumulate after our divorce wasn't my responsibility. And what about the secretary he was involved with? Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer from our legal proceedings. Sophia. Chen? She left Charleston entirely. I heard she moved to Atlanta and is working for a nonprofit organization now. Apparently, the whole experience made her reconsider her career priorities. This information actually pleased me. Sophia had been young and naive, manipulated by someone who should have been protecting her professional interests rather than exploiting them. The fact that she'd landed somewhere safe and was building an honorable career suggested she'd learned from the experience and moved on constructively. The evening concluded with an invitation I hadn't expected. Dr. Singh approached me as the reception was winding down with a proposal that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Vivian, I've been talking with several other successful women about starting an investment group focused on supporting female entrepreneurs in Charleston. We're looking for someone with real estate expertise and strong business judgment to help evaluate opportunities. Would you be interested in a founding partnership? The Charleston Women's Investment Collective, as it would later be called, represented exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping for. Not just a chance to expand my own business interests, but an opportunity to help other women build the kind of financial independence I'd created for myself. I'd be very interested, I replied. When do we start? As I drove home to my penthouse that night, past the buildings I owned and the properties I'd developed, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. A year ago, I'd been a successful businesswoman who defined herself partly through her marriage to someone else. Tonight, I was a recognized industry leader, a government advisor, and a founding member of Charleston's most influential women's investment group. The penthouse felt different now, too. Not just because Marcus was gone, but because it had become truly mine in every sense. I'd redecorated completely, transforming it from a space that reflected our shared compromises into something that expressed my own vision and priorities. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your award tonight. You deserve all the recognition you're receiving. S. I stared at the message for a long moment before realizing it was from Sophia. Somehow she'd heard about the business award and had reached out to acknowledge it. The gesture was unexpectedly gracious, especially coming from someone who had every reason to avoid any contact with my orbit. I typed back, "Thank you. I hope Atlanta is treating you well." Her response came quickly. "It is. Starting over was the best thing that could have happened to me. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." As I set my phone aside and looked out at the Charleston skyline from my floor-to-ceiling windows, I realized that the victory wasn't just about what I'd gained. It was about what I'd discovered was possible when I stopped accepting limitations that other people had placed on my potential. Marcus had thought he was leaving me for something better. Instead, he'd given me permission to become everything I'd been holding back to preserve a relationship that had been limiting both of us. The recognition, the awards, the business growth, the political appointments, none of it would have happened if I'd remained in a marriage where I was constantly accommodating someone else's insecurities about my success. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing what you thought you wanted so you can discover what you were actually meant to have. 1 year after Marcus left me for his secretary, I stood in the penthouse office of the building I'd just purchased, the same building that housed Palmetto Wealth Management, on the 15th floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in Charleston's business community. The woman whose husband had worked for a prestigious wealth management firm now owned the building where that firm operated, and her ex-husband was selling insurance from a strip mall office 20 miles outside the city, but their fates weren't what defined my success anymore. What mattered was what I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal, not just a larger real estate empire, but a completely transformed understanding of my own potential. The Charleston Women's Investment Collective had grown from Dr. Singh's initial idea into a powerhouse organization that had funded 12 female-owned businesses in our first year alone. Our success rate was unprecedented. Every single venture we'd supported had not only survived but thrived, generating employment for over 200 people and contributing millions of dollars to Charleston's economic development. The mayor wants to schedule a meeting about the historic district revitalization project, Carmen announced, entering my new office with the kind of confident efficiency that had made her the perfect successor to manage my day-to-day operations. "They're ready to move forward with your proposal for affordable housing integration. The Historic District Project was my pride and joy, a comprehensive plan to preserve Charleston's architectural heritage while creating opportunities for working families to live in the city center instead of being pushed out by gentrification." It was the kind of visionary thinking that required both business acumen and social responsibility, and it had positioned me as one of the most influential voices in South Carolina's urban development discussions. Schedule it for next week. And, "Carmen, make sure they understand that community input sessions are non-negotiable. This project succeeds only if it serves the people who actually live here, not just the ones who visit for vacation." My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Superior Court just approved the final asset recovery payment. Marcus's last check clears today. $47,000 plus interest, returned to your business account where it belongs." The money had never been about the dollar amount. It was about the principle that actions have consequences, that you can't steal from your spouse to fund an affair and expect to escape accountability. But receiving those funds felt like the official closing of a chapter that had redefined everything I thought I knew about power, loyalty, and the difference between being loved and being valued. A knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Beaumont, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." I looked up to see a young woman in her early 20s, professionally dressed but nervous, holding what appeared to be a college portfolio. She had the kind of determined expression I recognized from my own mirror 20 years ago. Someone with big dreams and the work ethic to make them reality. "Mrs. Beaumont, my name is Elena Santos. I'm a business student at the College of Charleston, and I've been following your career for the past year as part of my senior project on female entrepreneurship." The name Santos caught my attention immediately. It had been my maiden name before, I became Mrs. Richardson before I'd started defining myself through someone else's identity and accomplishments. What can I do for you, Elena? I wanted to thank you, actually. Your story, what you built after your divorce, how you turned betrayal into opportunity. It inspired me to start my own business instead of just dreaming about it. She opened her portfolio to show me a detailed business plan for a sustainable fashion company that would employ immigrant women in Charleston's growing Latino community, providing both economic opportunity and skills training that could lead to long-term financial independence. This is impressive work, Elena. Have you considered applying for funding through the Women's Investment Collective? That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to meet you first, to understand how someone goes from losing everything to building something this significant. My grandmother always told me that successful people aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who turn failure into fuel. I studied this young woman who reminded me so much of myself at that age. Hungry, determined, and smart enough to understand that success required both vision and strategy. But she had something I hadn't possessed at 22. The knowledge that women could build empires without needing anyone's permission or partnership. Elena, let me ask you something. What's the biggest obstacle you think you'll face in building your business? Honestly, learning to trust my own judgment. I've spent so much time asking other people what they think about my ideas that I sometimes forget to listen to my own instincts. Her answer revealed a wisdom that had taken me decades to develop. The ability to value your own insight over other people's opinions was something I'd only learned after Marcus's betrayal forced me to stop seeking external validation and start trusting my own strategic thinking. That's the most important lesson any entrepreneur can learn, I told her. Other people will always have opinions about what you should do, what risks you should take, what success should look like. But nobody else has to live with the consequences of your choices. Trust yourself first. I spent the next hour reviewing Elena's business plan, offering suggestions about market positioning and strategic partnerships. But more importantly, I shared something I'd learned over the past year, that the most successful ventures come from understanding your own strengths instead of trying to compensate for other people's weaknesses. Elena, I'm going to make sure you get a presentation slot at next month's collective meeting. But whether or not you receive funding, I want you to remember something. Your success doesn't depend on anyone else's approval, support, or partnership. It depends on your willingness to bet everything on your own capabilities. After Elena left, I sat in my office as the Charleston afternoon sun painted the harbor, in shades of gold and amber. The view from my new building was spectacular, but what I valued most was what it represented. The tangible proof that I'd built something meaningful from the ruins of a marriage that had been limiting my potential for years. My phone rang with a call from an unknown California number. Mrs. Beaumont, this is Sophia Chen. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from your business website. Sophia, this is unexpected. How are you? I'm well, thank you. I'm actually calling because I wanted you to know that I'm getting married next month. To someone who's honest, kind, and who sees me as an equal partner rather than a convenient escape from his real life. The news should have felt strange, but instead it felt like justice. Sophia had learned from her experience with Marcus, had moved away from the situation that could have destroyed her reputation, and had found someone who valued her for who she was rather than what she represented. Congratulations, Sophia. I'm genuinely happy for you. Mrs. Beaumont, I also wanted to tell you that what you built after everything that happened, it inspired me to start over completely. I'm working with a nonprofit that helps young women who've been exploited in workplace relationships. We help them understand their rights, rebuild their careers, and recognize the difference between mentorship and manipulation. This was perhaps the most satisfying update I could have received. Sophia hadn't just recovered from her experience with Marcus. She'd transformed it into a mission to help other women avoid similar exploitation. That's incredible work, Sophia. The world needs more people who turn their difficult experiences into opportunities to help others. I learned that from watching you. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like when it's focused on building something instead of tearing something down. As evening approached, I walked through my building, checking on the various businesses that rented space from me. Dr. Singh's medical practice was thriving on the 8th floor. The law firm that had helped Isabella establish the Women's Investment Collective occupied the entire 9th floor. The technology startup that represented our collective's first major success story had just expanded to take over the 7th floor. Every tenant represented not just rental income, but a partnership with people who understood that success was built through mutual respect and shared vision rather than exploitation and manipulation. Standing on my penthouse balcony as Charleston's historic church bells marked the end of another day, I reflected on the journey from discovering Marcus's betrayal to building an empire that was entirely my own. The woman who'd been devastated by finding photos of her husband with another woman had been replaced by someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Marcus had thought he was discarding me for something better. Instead, he'd given me permission to discover what I was capable of when I stopped limiting myself to someone else's vision of what I should accept. His betrayal hadn't broken me. It had revealed exactly how strong I'd always been beneath the compromises and accommodations of a marriage that had been holding both of us back. The real victory wasn't that Marcus had lost his job, his reputation, and his financial security. The real victory was that I'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that my success belonged entirely to me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, because it forces you to discover who you really are when you stop being who someone else needs you to be. Marcus left me for his secretary, never knowing I was her boss and his landlord. But more importantly, he never knew that losing him would teach me I'd never needed him at all. If this story resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm sharing something even more powerful. The story of how I helped 12 other women build million-dollar businesses in just 18 months. You won't want to miss it. Remember, sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you want because it's saving you for something better. Trust the process, trust yourself, and never let anyone convince you that you're not capable of extraordinary things. Your breakthrough is waiting on the other side of your biggest challenge. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.